Marcus Ellis was 41 years old when his wife stood in their kitchen, pointed a finger at the door, and said the name she'd been saying in silence for years out loud. For 16 years, Marcus had been a devoted husband, a youth baseball coach on Saturday mornings, and the lead civil structural engineer for a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio, that he had joined straight out of graduate school. He drove a 2014 GMC Sierra with 138,000 miles on it and a crack in the passenger side mirror he'd been meaning to replace since 2021. He carried his lunch to work in a black insulated bag, turkey, provolone, mustard on wheat, made every morning at 5:30 a.m., while the house was still dark. He remembered their anniversary without a reminder. He fixed things before she asked. He had never, in 16 years of marriage, raised his voice at her. She had raised hers at him 3 times in the past 8 months. The third time, she screamed that a man named Michael Ashworth would have given her the life she deserved. She had no idea that Marcus had known Michael Ashworth for 14 years, and that Michael owed him everything he had. What Diane did next would cost her the only financial security she had ever actually possessed. Leave her dependent on a man she barely knew, and force her, 18 months later, to sit across from Marcus in a mediator's office and sign away her claims to a portfolio she had never known existed. What Marcus set in motion the morning after her ultimatum, Diane would never fully recover from. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm went off at 5:14 a.m. Marcus silenced it without looking, sat up in the dark, and gave himself 30 seconds. That was his ritual, 30 seconds of stillness before the day started. He had done it since graduate school. His thesis advisor had told him that an engineer who didn't know the difference between thinking and reacting was a liability to everyone around him. Marcus had taken that literally. He dressed in the dark, jeans, a worn gray Ohio State sweatshirt, thick wool socks. He went downstairs. He filled the percolator and set it on the back burner and stood at the kitchen window while it worked, looking out at the yard. October. The maple in the corner had gone orange overnight. He noted it the way he noted everything. A quiet register, no editorializing. He made 2 eggs over easy. 8 standing at the counter, washed the pan and the plate and the fork and set them in the rack. He filled his thermos, black, no sugar, screwed the lid tight. He pulled on his Carhartt jacket, checked the inside pocket for the yellow legal notepad he brought to every site visit, and went out to the truck. The GMC started on the first try. It always did. He'd rebuilt the engine at 110,000 miles himself, a Saturday project that had taken 3 weekends and the help of his neighbor Darnell, who was a retired mechanic and treated engines with the same affection other men reserved for grandchildren. Marcus respected that. He respected people who took care of their tools. The site was 45 minutes east. A 4-story mixed-use development that the city had been trying to break ground on for 3 years. Marcus had been brought in 9 months ago when the original structural plans turned up a load transfer problem in the east foundation that nobody wanted to talk about. He'd found the problem in his first walkthrough. He'd had the solution drafted by the following Wednesday. The developer, a man named Kowalski who wore fleece vests and said synergy too often, had clapped him on the back and told him he was worth every penny. Marcus had nodded and asked when they'd be ready to review the corrected specs. He parked at the edge of the site, pulled on his hard hat, and started at the south end. He moved without hurrying. The way he moved through everything, his eyes going to each structural element in sequence, his left hand occasionally pulling out the yellow notepad to mark something. He found a rebar spacing discrepancy in the 3rd floor west wall that shouldn't have been there. He marked it in orange chalk. clipped a note to the foreman's clipboard, and was back at his truck by 8:45 a.m. On the drive back, he called his mother. "You sleep?" she asked. "5 hours, same as your father." A pause. "How's Diane?" "She's fine." There was a silence that meant his mother was deciding whether to press it. She decided not to. "Come for dinner Sunday. I'm making the short ribs. I'll be there," he said. And he would be. He had not missed a Sunday dinner at his mother's house in 4 years. He had met Diane Colton at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital in the spring of 2008. She was a development coordinator for a local nonprofit, pretty in a careful way, well-spoken, with a laugh that arrived late to jokes, as if she vetted them first. She'd asked him what he did, and he'd told her, and she looked genuinely interested. That had mattered to him. He was not the kind of man people found interesting at parties. He was fine with that. He found himself interesting enough. They dated for 2 years. They married on a Saturday in June 2010 in a ceremony of 60 people at a state park outside Columbus, under a white tent that swayed in the wind. His mother cried. Diane's mother gave a toast that went 4 minutes too long. Marcus stood next to Diane and thought about the rest of his life, with the same measured hopefulness he brought to everything. For the first 8 years, it was good. Not dramatic, not Instagram good, real good. They bought a house in Westerville, a 4-bedroom 1991 colonial with a cracked basement wall and a kitchen that needed new cabinets. Marcus fixed the basement wall himself and built the cabinets over 2 months of evenings, measured twice, cut once, secured to last. Diane chose the hardware. She had a good eye for aesthetics. He had never disputed it. They had tried for children. It didn't happen. They stopped trying around year 7 without ever having a direct conversation about stopping. Marcus had taken his grief to the backyard and the workbench and the baseball diamond on Saturday mornings, where he coached 11-year-olds how to field grounders. Diane had taken hers somewhere he couldn't see. He should have noticed what happened after that. He saw it now, in retrospect, like a crack in a load-bearing wall that you only recognize after the structure has shifted, the small withdrawals. The dinner conversations that stopped being conversations and became updates. The Saturday mornings she used to come to the Diamond with coffee and left when they started ending the season early. The way she said "your friends" instead of "our friends" when she meant the same people they'd had to dinner since 2013. Then, Michael Ashworth had come to Columbus. Marcus had known Michael since 2010. They'd overlapped briefly at a continuing education conference in Pittsburgh. Michael was in commercial real estate development, loud and optimistic, and the kind of man who said we should get coffee sometime and then actually sent the follow-up email. Marcus had found him useful rather than charming, which was the higher compliment. Over the years, they had sent referrals back and forth. Marcus had connected clients to Michael's development projects, and Michael had brought Marcus's name to 2 projects that had generated significant consulting fees. They were not close. They were professionally adjacent, the kind of relationship that functioned entirely on mutual benefit and dissolved without it. Michael had relocated to Columbus in the spring of the previous year. He and Diane had apparently met at an open house that Diane had attended in a professional capacity. Marcus didn't know when the meetings became something else. He suspected he hadn't been paying close enough attention. The signs he'd noticed were the ones he hadn't decoded. A new coat she bought herself for the fall. Italian wool, in a shade of burgundy that was somehow specific in a way her previous coats hadn't been. 2 evenings in a month when her phone had been turned face down on the counter. A hesitation before she named the friend she'd had lunch with. Not long enough to matter on its own. Long enough to file. He hadn't gone looking. That was the truth of it. He had noticed and not pursued, because he was, at his core, a man who needed evidence before he acted on an instinct. He got the evidence on a Tuesday evening in the second week of October. He had left his yellow legal notepad at the site. He almost didn't go back for it. He told himself he'd get it in the morning. Then he remembered there were notes from the Kowalski pre-pour meeting that he needed for the report he was finishing, and so he turned the truck around at the next light. He was home by 7:30. He pulled into the driveway and noted that Diane's car was gone. She'd mentioned something about book club, he thought, or maybe a work event. He went in through the garage. He took off his boots at the back door. He was looking for his notepad on the kitchen counter when he saw her laptop, open on the breakfast bar, the screen still on. He almost kept walking. Her email was open. She had been mid-composition when she'd left. He saw his own name in the body of the message, and his feet stopped. He stood at the breakfast bar for a long moment. Then he read it. It was addressed to her sister Carol. It was 3 paragraphs long. The first 2 were about Michael, his energy, the way he saw the world, how he made her feel like her life could still be something. The third paragraph was about Marcus. He's a good man, she had written. But he's always been content with just enough. Content with the house, the job, the same routines. I spent 16 years hoping that would change. Michael sees what I could have. I'm tired of being with someone who doesn't. He read it twice. His hands went still on the countertop. His breathing stayed even. Something behind his sternum went very cold and very quiet. He stood in his own kitchen for what might have been a full minute, looking at the words his wife had written about him, and did not move. Then he took his phone from his jacket pocket and photographed the screen. He photographed it from 2 angles. He forwarded the images to his email. He closed the laptop. He found his notepad on the dining room table. He went back out to the truck and sat with the engine off for a while, looking at the garage door. Cooling metal ticked in the silence. He thought about his 30 seconds of morning stillness and how that was practice for exactly this, the difference between reacting and thinking. He started the engine and drove. He called his oldest friend Raymond on the way home from the site the next morning. Raymond Hicks had been Marcus's roommate in college, the best man at his wedding, and the kind of friend who picked up on the second ring regardless of the hour. When Marcus told him what he'd found, Raymond was quiet for 4 full seconds, which, for Raymond, was an eternity. "I'm coming over," Raymond said. "You don't need to. I'm coming over." He came over that evening. Marcus made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. Raymond said things that Marcus wouldn't let himself say. He used words Marcus wasn't ready to use. He offered to do things that Marcus would not allow. When Raymond was done, Marcus looked at him across the table. "I need to handle this the right way," Marcus said. "What does that mean?" "It means legally. Completely with documentation." Raymond stared at him. "You've already thought about this. I've been thinking since yesterday." Raymond exhaled. "What do you need from me? Right now, just this. Someone to know." Raymond nodded. He refilled his coffee. "Okay, so I know." 3 days later, Marcus sat across a conference table from an attorney named Sandra Tillman. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, clean and spare, with degrees from Duke University and the Ohio State Moritz College of Law on the wall, and a bookcase full of annotated family law volumes that were worn from actual use. She had been handling high-asset domestic cases in Columbus for 22 years. A colleague had given Marcus her name on a Tuesday and said simply, "She's the one you want." Marcus laid out what he had, methodically, the email. The timeline of behavioral changes as he'd observed and documented them over the past several months, he'd written them out in a separate notepad the day before the appointment. Dates and observations, factual and unornamented. He slid both across the table. Sandra Tillman read everything without a word. When she finished, she set the pages down and looked at him. "Mr. Ellis," she said, "I've been doing this for 22 years. This is one of the most straightforward cases I've seen in the past decade. The documentation you've provided, combined with Ohio's equitable distribution statutes, gives us a very clear path forward." She paused. "That said, I need to ask you something before we proceed." "Go ahead," Marcus said. "You mentioned your wife has a relationship with a man named Michael Ashworth. You said you know him professionally. Is there anything about that relationship, yours with Ashworth, that I should know?" Marcus looked at the window for a moment. Then he turned back to Sandra Tillman. "Yes," he said. "There is." In 2017, Marcus had loaned Michael Ashworth $340,000. It was not a secret, exactly. It was the kind of thing that existed in documents, a properly structured private loan agreement, notarized, with interest terms and a repayment schedule, but that had never been discussed in the marriage because Marcus's finances, as a matter of long practice, were managed quietly. He had his own accounts. He had always had his own accounts. Diane had a joint account with him that covered the household. His consulting income beyond what he contributed to the household had always gone elsewhere. She had not asked where. She had never asked where. The $340,000 loan had been made when Michael's development company had faced a temporary liquidity crisis on a project that would have cratered without bridge financing. Marcus had the capital. Michael needed it for 9 months. Marcus had an attorney draw up the agreement, charged a competitive interest rate, and deposited the funds without ceremony. Michael had repaid the principal in 2018 with interest, and had sent a bottle of very good bourbon and a handwritten note that Marcus had kept in his desk drawer. But the loan had created something else. As part of the agreement, Michael had offered, and Marcus had accepted, a 4.5% equity stake in the development project itself. The Alderton Commons mixed-use development in the Short North. The project had completed in 2019. It had been generating cash distributions to investors ever since. Marcus had 3 other similar arrangements. A 6% stake in a residential conversion project in Italian Village from 2018. A 3.8% stake in a commercial property in Worthington he'd helped finance for a different developer in 2020, and a 12% ownership interest in a private equity fund that Raymond's cousin had started in 2021 that held 5 properties across 3 Ohio counties. None of this was hidden. All of it was properly documented. All of it appeared on his tax filings, which Diane had never once looked at. She had handed him the W-2 from her nonprofit job each February and told him to handle it. Sandra Tillman listened to all of this without expression. When Marcus was done, she uncapped her pen. "Did Mr. Ashworth know you are Diane's husband? We were introduced once, years ago, at a conference. I don't know if she's told him." Sandra Tillman wrote something on her notepad. "Mr. Ellis," she said carefully, "I want to make sure you understand the scope of what you're telling me. I understand it. Ohio is an equitable distribution state. The marital estate is subject to division based on what's considered marital versus separate property." She paused. "When did each of these investments originate?" Marcus opened his own notepad and read her the dates. Every single one of them preceded the marriage. Every one had grown during the marriage on what Ohio courts had historically treated, under the right documentation, as a separable return on separate property. particularly if that property had been maintained in a separate account with no commingling of marital funds. Sandra Tillman set down her pen. She looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a person examining a structural plan and finding it exactly as sound as it claimed to be. "You've never commingled these funds with the joint account?" "Never. Your wife has no signatory authority on any of these accounts?" "No. Have you ever, in conversation or in writing, represented these holdings as marital assets?" "No." She recapped her pen. "Then, we have a very different conversation ahead of us than most of my clients come in expecting." She leaned back. "I'll need the full documentation package on each holding, original agreements, account statements going back to inception, all tax filings. And I'm going to reach out to a forensic accountant I work with to prepare a valuation report. The timeline for that is 3 to 4 weeks. She looked at him directly. "Do not change any of your financial habits or structures during that period. Do not move money. Do not close accounts. Do not have any financial conversations with your wife. Let things appear as they are." "Understood," Marcus said. He picked up his notepad and stood. "One more thing," he said. "Yes?" "Michael Ashworth. The man my wife is seeing. I told you he owes me money." He paused. "He doesn't. He paid the loan back years ago. What he has is an ongoing equity arrangement that generates quarterly distributions." He let that settle. "Those distributions go through a management account. The management account is administered by an LLC I control." He held Sandra Tillman's gaze. "Which means, in effect, that my wife's boyfriend has been, for the past several years, depositing money into an account I own." Sandra Tillman looked at him for a long moment. "Let's talk about that," she said. Marcus drove home through the October dusk. He stopped at a hardware store and picked up a new set of sandpaper and 3 grits for a project he'd been working on, the wraparound back porch that needed a full refinish before winter. He drove the rest of the way with the radio off. Diane was home when he got there. She was at the kitchen table on her laptop, and she looked up when he came in and said hello in a tone that was entirely neutral, which told him nothing and everything at once. He said hello back. He made himself a glass of water. He took it upstairs and worked on a consulting proposal until 10 p.m. Over the next 3 weeks, he was very still. He went to the site. He drove his truck. He made his lunch. He coached the weekend baseball clinic he'd agreed to run through November for a group of 12-year-olds whose regular coaches had both been laid off. He had Sunday dinner at his mother's house. He did not tell her anything. She looked at him the way she always did when she was waiting for him to be ready, which was to say she looked at him normally and said nothing beyond normal things. One evening in that 3rd week, Diane came home at 9:45 p.m. from what she described in the morning as a work event. She said the event ran long. Marcus said okay. She looked at him for a moment, then went upstairs. He stayed in the study, where he'd been reading, and did not watch her go. The forensic accountant Sandra had retained completed the valuation report on a Thursday in late October. Marcus drove downtown to Sandra's office to review it. The separate property portfolio, the 4 investment positions, fully documented, all premarital in origin and maintained without commingling, had a combined present value of $2.14 million. Annual income from distributions had averaged $87,000 over the past 3 years. The Ohio precedent on tracing separate property in equitable distribution proceedings, Sandra explained, was well established and worked substantially in Marcus's favor given the documentation he'd maintained. The marital estate, the house, the joint savings account, 2 vehicles, had an estimated value of $618,000 before mortgage. Sandra walked him through the projection. In the most favorable scenario, she said, which I consider likely given the documentation. Your separate property remains your separate property. The marital estate gets split under equitable distribution. Given the length of the marriage, the lack of children, and your respective incomes, that split will likely favor you modestly. Perhaps 55-45, possibly 60-40 in your direction given her recent behavior and the documentation of the relationship. She looked at him. You keep the truck and the study contents, of course, as personal property. The house gets valued and split, either sold, or she buys out your share, or you buy out hers. Marcus looked at the numbers on the page. What is her likely settlement expectation? He asked. Based on what she knows about your finances, Sandra said, she's probably expecting half of approximately $618,000 and half of a structural engineering salary. A pause. She doesn't know about the portfolio. No. Then she's going to make an offer that assumes she holds significant leverage. Sandra looked at him with a careful neutrality. And she'll be wrong. Diane filed for divorce on a Monday morning in November. Marcus received the paperwork at work via email, forwarded from his personal account. He read it at his desk, saved the document, and went back to the Kowalski pre-pour report. At noon, he texted Sandra. Papers received. She replied within 2 minutes, expected. We're ready. Don't respond to her directly. He didn't. Diane called him that evening. He let it go to voicemail. Her message was brisk, businesslike. She'd spoken to an attorney. She thought it was time they talked practically about next steps, like adults. He should call her back. He texted Raymond instead. It's moving. Raymond replied, I'm here whenever you need me. Over the following 2 weeks, Marcus learned, through Sandra's information network, the shape of what Diane and her attorney were expecting. They believed they were negotiating a relatively simple dissolution of a 16-year marriage, his engineering salary, the house, the joint savings, split cleanly. They had requested full financial disclosure, as required. Marcus provided it in complete detail. Through Sandra, he imagined the moment when Diane's attorney opened that disclosure package. The mediation was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in January at a downtown firm on the 18th floor with pale maple tables and windows that looked out across the Columbus skyline. Diane arrived with her attorney, a man named Garrett Pryor, who wore a well-cut navy suit and had the practiced ease of a man who was accustomed to winning on details. He sat down across from Sandra Tillman and placed his own folder on the table with a kind of quiet confidence that belonged to someone who did not yet know the terrain. Marcus arrived precisely at 9 a.m. He wore a gray sport coat over a dark shirt. He had his yellow legal notepad in front of him. He helped Sandra arrange her document stacks in order. He did not look at Diane until she spoke. She spoke almost immediately. Marcus, she said. Her tone was meant to be conciliatory. I want you to know I didn't want this to be adversarial. He looked at her. He said nothing. Her attorney cleared his throat. We'd like to begin with the property inventory. He opened his folder. We've reviewed Mr. Ellis's disclosure documentation, and we have some questions about He paused, scanning the investment portfolio disclosures. Sandra spoke. Of course. We anticipated that. We've prepared a detailed supplemental response. She slid a bound document across the table. Pryor picked it up. Diane leaned over to look at it. Marcus watched the moment that she reached the asset summary page and stopped. He had counted on this. Not with cruelty, with precision. He had known that there would be a moment when she would encounter, in full documentation, the full scope of what her 16-year dismissal of his financial life had meant. The summary page showed 4 investment positions, the origination dates, the present valuations, and the income history. It showed, in a column at the right, the determination basis for separate property classification under Ohio law. It showed the number $2.14 million. Diane looked up at him. He looked back at her. He said, "I never hid who I was. You just decided what I was worth before you thought to ask." Pryor was reading the supplemental document carefully. The practiced ease had drained out of him. He said, without looking up, "This pre-marital origination documentation, is this complete?" "Comprehensive and verified," Sandra said. "All accounts have been maintained in separate instruments since inception, with no commingling of marital funds. The forensic accounting report is included as Exhibit C. Pryor read for another 2 minutes. The room was quiet enough that the ventilation system behind the walls was audible, a faint, steady hum. Marcus sat with his hands on his notepad and did not fidget. Diane said, quietly, "I didn't know about any of this." Marcus looked at her. "I know," he said. "You never asked." Pryor looked across the table. "Mr. Ellis," he said carefully, "we'd like a recess to review this documentation more fully." "Of course," Sandra said. Marcus waited in a small conference room down the hall with a cup of coffee that went cold and the view of the skyline. Raymond had offered to wait in the lobby downstairs, and Marcus had allowed it because Raymond was exactly the kind of friend who needed to be doing something useful, and waiting was doing something. After 45 minutes, Sandra came in. She sat across from him. "They want to settle," she said. "Today, if possible." "What are the terms?" She told him. The house would be listed and sold. The marital estate, $618,000 after valuation, would be split 58-42 in Marcus's favor, accounting for Diane's documented breach of the marital covenant and the additional documentation of the relationship with Ashworth, which Pryor had stopped contesting once he saw the full financial picture. The separate property portfolio was categorized as Marcus's separate property in its entirety, insulated from the marital estate. Diane would receive no claim on the investment income, no claim on the equity positions, no claim on any account that had existed before the marriage. "What does she get?" Marcus said. "Approximately $260,000 from the home sale, her car, and her half of the joint savings, which is about $31,000. Sandra paused, and a clean exit from a marriage where she underestimated her husband. Marcus looked out the window at the skyline. He thought about the wraparound porch at home, the sandpaper he'd bought, the refinishing he'd promised himself he'd finish before the first hard freeze. He thought about the baseball kids he was coaching on Saturday mornings. He thought about his mother's kitchen on Sunday evenings and the short ribs and the porch light that was always on when he pulled in. "Okay," he said. The paperwork was signed that afternoon. Marcus walked to the elevator bank with Sandra. She pressed the button and waited with him. She said, "For what it's worth, you handled that remarkably well." "I just had the documentation in order," he said. She smiled. "Most people don't." He took the elevator down. In the lobby, Raymond was sitting in a leather chair with his coat on, scrolling his phone. He stood when Marcus came through the doors. He looked at Marcus's face and said, "Done?" "Done," Marcus said. Raymond looked at him for a moment, the way he'd looked at him since they were 19 years old and rooming in a 400-square-foot dorm room on High Street. Then he said, "Short ribs at your mom's Sunday?" Marcus put on his jacket. "She already knows we're coming," he said. He spent that February in the house alone. He had made an arrangement with Diane that she would stay with her sister while the house was listed. He made good use of the quiet. He finished the wraparound porch, sanded it down to bare wood, 2 coats of primer, 2 coats of oil finish in a warm mahogany that his father had used on the pergola in the old house and that Marcus had always meant to use on something of his own. He repaired the catch in the refrigerator door he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. He built a new bookshelf for the study out of walnut he'd had seasoning in the garage since the previous spring. He measured twice. He cut once. He secured it to last. The house sold in March. Clean transaction. Good price. Marcus moved into a 3-bedroom house in Bexley with a deep backyard and original hardwood floors that needed exactly the kind of attention he knew how to give them. He was there a week when his mother came by with a casserole dish wrapped in a kitchen towel. She walked through the rooms without saying much. She looked at the floors. She looked at the light through the back windows. She went to the kitchen and put the casserole in the oven and then sat down at the small kitchen table. "Tell me about the floors," she said. "Quarter sawn oak," he said. 1948, I'll hand sand and refinish. 6 or 7 weekends. She nodded. She looked at him the way she had always looked at him when she was seeing something she approved of. "Your father would like this house," she said. "I know," he said. "He would like what you did." Marcus looked at his hands on the table. "I just had things in order." His mother looked at him steadily. "You built things that lasted," she said. "That's not just having things in order. That's who you are." They sat with that for a moment. The casserole ticked quietly in the oven. In April, Diane reached out through a mutual acquaintance, not through attorneys, just a message passed along, asking if Marcus would meet for coffee. He did not respond immediately. He thought about it for 3 days with the same unhurried deliberateness he applied to sidewalks and load calculations. He met her at a coffee shop in Bexley on a Thursday morning. She arrived before him, which surprised him. She looked diminished in a way that had nothing to do with clothes or appearance. She looked like a person who had been recalibrating for months and hadn't finished. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. She asked him how he was. "Good," he said. She asked about the new house. He told her about the floors. Then she said, "I need you to know that I didn't understand what I was doing." He looked at her. He was quiet for a moment. "I know that," he said. "That's exactly the problem." She looked down at her cup. "Michael and I..." She stopped. She started again. He moved on. "It turned out I wasn't what he was looking for, either." Marcus said nothing. He had heard this through Raymond weeks ago and had noted it the way he noted everything. "I'm not telling you that, too. I don't know why I'm telling you that." She looked at him. "I guess I wanted you to understand that I know I was wrong. About a lot of things." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. The coffee shop was warm. Outside, the street was beginning its April business. People in light jackets, a delivery truck double parked, a kid on a bicycle. "Diane," he said, "for 16 years I made your lunch and fixed your house and showed up for everything you needed and never once asked you to notice it. I wasn't hiding from you. I just never needed to announce myself." He paused. "You built a picture of who I was and you lived inside it, and you never once thought to check if it was real." He set his coffee cup down. "That's what I need you to understand, not as something I'm holding against you, as the truth." She looked at him. Her eyes went glassy and then steady. "You were right," she said. "I never asked." He nodded. He stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He said, "Take care of yourself." He meant it. He walked out of the coffee shop into the April morning. He had a site visit at 10:30. He had a call with Raymond at noon about a Saturday baseball clinic they were putting together for the summer. He had a bookshelf at home that needed a second coat of finish. He got into the GMC. He drove. He did not look back. Not because there was nothing worth looking at. Because there was too much worth looking at ahead. That summer, Marcus spent 6 Saturdays refinishing the Bexley house floors. He sanded them by hand, section by section, starting at the front room and working back toward the kitchen. He worked with the same patience he brought to everything. No hurry, no shortcuts. The same attention to the grain and the level and the finish that he had applied to every project he'd ever completed. By August, they were done. Quarter sawn white oak, 1948, refinished in an oil and wax finish that brought up the grain and the warmth without trying to make it something it wasn't. Marcus stood at the entrance to the front room on the morning he finished the last coat and looked at the floor for a long time. It was good. It was exactly what it was supposed to be. He walked to the kitchen, filled his thermos, black, no sugar, and screwed the lid tight. He picked up his Carhartt jacket from the hook by the back door. He had a site visit this morning. A new project, a school renovation in Hilliard that was going to take 18 months and required the kind of attention he was very good at giving. He went out to the truck. The maple in the backyard had started to turn. A week early, this year. He noted it. He started the engine. He went to work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.